welcome to the 10th edition of the Future of Education Summit on CNBC Africa. I'm Gamokhetso Mosepele and your host for the day. We are joined by an international audience on the Ring Central virtual platform. Now, the theme for the day is Education Renaissance, charting a sustainable future for Africa. As you can see, I have been joined on the desk by my colleague, CNBC Africa's senior anchor, Fifi Peters, who will be leading the first panel discussion today. Fifi, thank you for joining us. And
Happy to be here.
Yeah, just as you open the first official discussion for the day, what will you and your panelists be talking about?
You know, I think I am really keen to reflect some of the sentiments of young people that I interact with on the ground, and particularly graduates who I'm sure you know, people that you went to school with, university with sometimes as well, who have come into the economy and have come into an economy that does not have prospects, job prospects for them. Some of them might have studied medicine or mining, engineering, really technical subjects, and they've come out and they've had to be, retail assistants, or have to do really jobs that are below what they studied for at university. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the experts about what they think about this situation that hasn't changed for a very long time, and obviously how they think we can build a more sustainable ecosystem. So I'm going to get to that conversation right now. Gyama, I know we're going to be seeing you again a little bit later on the show. You're doing a great job, by the way, and I'm going to relieve you for now, but do be back in an hour. For those of you, of course, who have just joined and are joining, just like me, welcome to the Future of Education Summit. My name is Fifi Peters, and certainly excited to be back. Can't believe that it has been around 10 years since CNBC Africa first took up the education conversation. It was a live event initially at the University of Johannesburg. Today, our first topics, as was mentioned with my conversation with Gyamo, is around sustainable education models. So we're looking at innovation also, as well as sustainable approaches to the delivery of education. Most of you will be aware that we do find ourselves at a bit of a crossroad right now. It is a juncture where a tradition does meet transformation. So we do have to move our focus beyond just mere pedagogy and extend it to resilience and adaptability, as well as ecological consciousness from digital ecosystems to community-driven initiatives as well. Sustainable education models have become our compass. They empower learners, they foster this critical thinking, and also they lay the groundwork, the all-important groundwork for a more harmonious world in which innovation is woven into the very fabric of education. So let's get on with the discussion. Before we do, let me introduce you to the panelists who are joining us from far and wide, literally today. We've got Japan, Australia, India, and Ghana in the house. Let's meet them.
The panelists are Prof. Gary Martin, CEO at the Australian Institute of Management, Western Australia; Prof. Chiliti Marala, Rector of the United Nations University and Under-Secretary General of the United Nations; Dr. Emmanuel Arthur, Provost and CEO at Lancaster University, Ghana; and Dr. Mahindra Sharma, Pro-Chancellor Director General at Ganpat University, India.
Gentlemen, welcome. Prof. Marwala, sir, I would like to begin with you. It is really nice to see that class officially in session right now with us discussing or kicking off the very first panel discussion of this year's event. We're here to talk about sustainable education models. And sir, I would like to put you on the spot now and just ask, for 10 marks, what do we mean by sustainable education in this current context?
No, thank you very much, Fifi, for the invitation and also for leading us in this discussion. What do we mean? I think sustainable means it has to be able to fulfill its goals. My grandmother used to say that knowledge becomes education when it finds a purpose in society and fulfill that purpose. So for education to be sustainable, first and foremost, it must be able to meet the objectives of education, which is to positively transform society. Secondly, education must actually change mindsets so that people can actually be able to go out there and play meaningful roles in the political, economic, and social spaces. And of course, for us to be able to do that, we need to move beyond certifications to education, so that we can be able to skill people, to be able to build things that they can be able to trade, be able to create systems that are going to be able to allow us to be able to deal with the biggest challenges we face: climate change, rapid technological development, and of course, peace and security. So that is really my take as to what education, sustainable education means.
Sure, it is a really broad theme. I mean, there's a lot of aspects that do encompass the sustainability, and that's why I thought it was a great, or it would be great to get your individual thoughts as to how the topic has landed within your corridors and your interpretation thereof. So, Prof. Martin, coming to you as well. When you look at the dynamics in the world right now, where we're coming from, what we're currently facing, and trends that are shaping where we're going to, how are you understanding the concept of sustainable education right now?
Well, I think what it really involves, Fifi, is actually reconsidering what a degree program might actually do for participants. And that means pretty much that what we have to look at preparing students for now, but also for the future as well. And I think, so our degrees have got to become, or our undergraduate qualifications in particular, have got to become more problem-centred and attached to solving world challenges. I think if we were to align our degree programs with world challenges, then we'd certainly be better off in the long run. But I think one element that sometimes we forget about as well is it's all well and good to talk about sustainable education models, but if our campuses themselves are not built on sustainability principles, then I think it kind of contradicts what we're trying to do in the first place. And so I'm talking about sustainable education practices across the board, but just how campuses are built and operate. Those things are very important when it comes to sustainability and sustainable education models.
All right, so just like Prof. Marwala, you have made reference to the certification right now, the value that we do place on this certification, and you have expressed ideas that perhaps we need to think beyond what we are or how we grade it right now. I'd like to get the thoughts of the other panelists right now. Dr. Sharma, sir, perhaps you can give us your take. I mean, we've had a bit of flavor from Japan with Prof. Marwala, Prof. Martin obviously giving us the sentiments being expressed from Australia. Sustainability, as you define it, sir, it looks like what?
Sustainability endeavors actually has three facets. It involves social, economical, and ecological considerations. And when we are talking about sustainable education, it's not about teaching sustainability. It's more about sustainable learning, which should focus on creation and proliferation of curriculums and methods of learning and teaching that shall instill in the people skills and dispositions that should help them address the complication and challenges and the circumstances which future is presenting to us. We saw COVID. Nobody was prepared for it. And it was like you have to come out of it. And then you had to do what you were not supposed to do. And you have to find out innovations in addressing it. So when we are talking about sustainable learning and education, we are talking about sustainability. We are talking about self-sufficiency. We are talking about consciousness. We are talking about methods of learning that should help an individual and a student to learn, unlearn, and relearn at a very faster pace and address the circumstances. And I agree with Professor when he said that campuses have to be prepared for it. Say, if you curate methods and activities, like at my university, every student have to do 3 levels of problem solving. Whatever they study, their critical thinking has to be focused on. They have to take a professor-given problem. Then they have to work on an industry-given problem. Then they have to work on a social or a national problem. So they are thrown into three different circumferences while they're studying with us. So you are trying to curate a methodology where their critical thinking is pushed, and they have to learn to work in teams. It's not only sustainability at individual level, it is sustainability within teams, it is sustainability at the organizational level. So it has to evolve collectively also. So in my view, sustainability, when it is encompassing these three important aspects of social, economic, and ecological considerations, and all of them, when they are interrelated, and when the learning has to be built around it as a concentric circle around it, it has to focus on the consciousness of the individual. So it's not about the knowers of the text, it is about the knowers of the self also.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Arthur, just your interpretations of the topic at hand.
All right, I would say that we need to be very careful we don't situate the sustainable education within just the formal sector, because this can also take place in the informal education. And I think I agree with the idea that we should just not be looking at the certification. In any sector, whether formal, informal, or professional development, that needs to continually renew itself. It needs to incorporate principles and aspirations of sustainability in the design, the delivery, and educating in ways that promote sustainable learning. So that's my concept about it. We must understand that this is, in adopting this approach, it is not structured, it is not fixed like the conventional education approach. And it operates more organically and responsively, depending on the circumstances and the context within which it is operating. And for me, fourth key criteria that we should use and determine any sustainable education approach is: one, how endurable is it? Is it endurable? How long can it withstand the times? Because it needs to be forward-looking. Secondly, it must be tenable. Tenable in the sense that it must be applicable within the context in which the education is being offered. Thirdly, it must be healthy. It is something that should survive the test of times. Within it, students and the ecosystem participating in that sustainable education will all become beneficiaries of it. It should be healthy. And more importantly, it should be durable. So endurability, tenability, healthiness, and durability, these four criteria should help us determine a sustainable education system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And fantastic initial impressions from all of you. Dr. Sharma, I actually want to pick up on the point that you made, the three areas in which you highlighted sustainability being economic, environmental, and social. And I'd once again like to invite Prof. Marwala to weigh in here, kick off the second round of responses for us. When we talk about environmental, I think maybe we're all aware right now of the growing and evolving risks of climate change and factors. Right now, one of our counterparts of the continent, Zambia, I see that the government there, because of the hit from the current El Nino pattern and the impact that it's had on water supply and ultimately electricity, they're looking to see if they need to start implementing around 17 hours a day of power cuts or power rationing from the current 12. And I make reference of this, Prof, because as a South African, based in Japan, but as a South African, you'll be well aware of the times where erratic power supply was a hindrance for business as well as our scholars at the classroom. So when you look at environmental factors and you look at the broader theme around climate right now, so how would you rank the sustainability of the current education system in Africa to some of the growing climate risks that we're seeing?
Well, I would say that in terms of the carbon footprint of education in the African continent, it is actually quite sustainable. Just the energy utilization in the classroom in the African continent is perhaps one of the lowest in the world, you know. That obviously is on, if we just look at the carbon footprint. But it comes at a cost that our students do not have enough power to run large data centers so that they can be able to simulate complicated things. And we need to find mechanisms of renewable energy so that we can be able to do that. And secondly, in terms of utilization of the resources, whether it is the amount of books that are printed and so on and so forth, I would say that we are sustainable. But I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is that in that sustainability mode, which in many ways is catalyzed by the level of underdevelopment in the African continent, is it sustainable? No, it is not sustainable. I think the people in the African continent must have access to world-class education. I think they must have access to world-class computing facilities, but all that must be done not just in the African continent, but across the world in a sustainable manner in terms of resource utilization.
Sure. Even when you talk about the carbon footprint right now, obviously because of the lack of access to technologies and broadband technology and infrastructure here in Africa compared to the rest of the world, Prof. Marwala, I read somewhere that apparently a chat GPT search uses around 10 times the amount of power as a regular Google search. And I just wanted your thoughts on that and how that obviously contributes to the discussion around sustainability.
Well, I mean, I think the sustainable energy use in computing is very, very important. We know what the limitations are. The limitations is that the transistor, which is really the bulk of the use of technology in the computing industry. Of course, now we have GPUs. It's not efficient. That is why when you use your device after a very short space of time, it is hot. That energy was supposed to be used in computing. So we need to deal with issues of sustainable technology. And if you even go back, when we actually create the chips that we use in these computing facilities, we also use quite a great deal of water. And we, even after that, when we are operating to cool our data centers, we use huge amounts of water. And therefore, the next stage of technological development must actually be around sustainability. The problem, where lies the problem? The problem is that much of the technological gadgets and infrastructure that is being created are being created using two principles: maximizing performance and reducing cost. I think we need to add the third principle, which is sustainability. It comes at a cost. So that optimization, we would call it cost function, must not just look at performance and cost. It must also look at the sustainability issues. And it has to start at the material selection levels, sure, all the way to the deployment of technology.
Okay, we'll perhaps get an opportunity to unpack a little bit further later on when we talk about some of the innovative ways to deliver education. But Dr. Sharma, I want to come back to you. I mean, you did make reference to COVID-19 and the shock thereof that the pandemic introduced to the world, and also the way of learning. Just dovetailing off the aspect around the climate shocks that are also disrupting certain institutions right now. So with COVID, what we did see is a lot of institutions reacting to a hybrid way of doing things, and it was integrated in learning as well for the schools and the tertiary institutions that of course could afford, and the scholars that could afford this online learning, a hybrid model of doing things. But what we have seen in the recent while, sir, is a return back to how we used to do things before in many aspects. If you also look at what's happening in the office, with a lot of employees now being called back to the office, and some industries even doing away with the hybrid way of working. So when you look at the resilience of our education system right now from future shocks, around climate, around even future pandemics, how would you rank that resilience, sir?
In fact, that has taught us a very important lesson, that learning can be multifaceted, first of the thing. And the lesson learned has not gone in vain. Today, when we see education has transformed, because that blending has given the opportunity to universities to offer the opportunities of not only learning in the classroom, but also take advantage of various kinds of other courses online and embed them in their curriculums. And at the same time, the time can be utilized to send them to projects in the universities. So a lot of internships have evolved using the time space where concept can be learned online and hands-on learning can happen at the place of work. So a lot of innovations, a lot of universities are able to do. And that has not only brought about opportunities of enhancement of employability, but has also given opportunities for entrepreneurship. So a lot of entrepreneurship is now happening, taking advantage of this blended form that has evolved post-COVID. And probably this has also opened up the mindset that learning is not boxed into brick and mortar model only. It can happen anywhere and in many formats. And this is where we will see that enhancement, because I will go back to the professor who talks about the blending of skills. Today, skill blending with entry and exit option in universities is happening, taking advantage of this blended learning. So if a student studying in a semester can take a skills course, and if he doesn't want to go further in the education because of reasons, can use that skill certification and pursue an employment. So those kinds of opportunities have come. And probably we have to bring again the concept of sustainable learning back to our methodologies to ensure that we are prepared for the unforeseen. We live in VUCA world. We know it's volatile, it is uncertain, it is complex, it is ambiguous. And while we are living in this VUCA world, we have to be prepared for such kinds of eventualities, and every learning has to be used as a foundation stone, and we have to do innovation around it to take the human society further by learning out of it.
Sure. Professor Martin, you too as well. I mean, if we are still staying in the lane of environmental studies, maybe adaptability to some of the climate risks and also other kind of environmental shocks. Would you say that the curriculums, as you see it right now, maybe you can even give us the experience from Australia, are sufficient in raising scholars who are acutely aware of these risks that are happening in society right now, have a thorough understanding, such that as they do learn the information and the content, so that they're able to come out of the classrooms and impact meaningful changes by applying what they have learned? Is the curriculum sufficient, or are you seeing gaps, particularly when it does pertain to teachings around sustainability in the environmental prism?
Yeah, the answer, Fifi, is directly no. We're not geared to address world challenges, including environmental challenges. We've talked about a hybrid concept in terms of the workplace and study, and we also have hybrid cars. We also need hybrid degree programs as well. So we don't have degrees that have a single focus. So, for example, mathematics. We have a mathematics degree with sustainability. We have policy with sustainability. We have business with sustainability. We have education with sustainability. So we need to be thinking about undergraduate university qualifications far more broadly and underpinning them with principles of sustainability. I mean, if I think about it, the most, I guess, impressive example that I've seen is in Brunel University in the UK. It's just an example of one institution that's already moved to remodel some of its offerings around global challenges. So the university itself, from what I understand, has 4 global challenge degrees, one in global innovation, one in planetary health, one in security, and one in social cohesion. And so at the end of that, you take out a Bachelor of Science, and you're studying both science or scientific and non-scientific subjects. So I think until we move towards degree programs that lose a narrow focus and go much broader and explore the principles of sustainability in a much stronger way, we're going to have graduates with a mindset that really rests within their own discipline area without branching out from that.
Sure. With that said, on the other side of the coin, it's the teachers who are teaching sustainability and whether they are adequately prepped and adequately informed to teach in this discipline. And this is a question to you, Dr. Arthur, regarding how you are seeing the ability of teachers to deliver lessons around sustainability as it does pertain to the environment, and whether, you know, this is where the community does step in, and whether this is where the partnerships and the collaborations that you were talking about with perhaps inviting people who are climate experts or conservation experts into the classroom to perhaps assist in this teaching. Your thoughts, sir?
Honestly, I think that in terms of the level of awareness and knowledge, a lot of faculty are really not abreast with some of these things. And I think it behoves on universities to ensure that there's a basic knowledge of these things by every faculty member. I'll cite an example. I mean, you come to Lancaster University, Ghana, and irrespective of your background or the discipline in which you hold a certification in, you are mandated to undertake an 18-month course in education. Because irrespective of your discipline, your background, you are required to have an understanding of what education entails. So you are required to take the PG CAP, for example. I think we need to incorporate some of these things into our understanding of sustainability as well. It should be mandatory that faculty, irrespective of the discipline in which you find yourself, you need to go through a certain training, knowledge, equipping in terms of what sustainability is about, so that in your delivery of your programs, in the delivery of your courses, whether law, whether computer science, whether business, at least you see the extent to which sustainability and environmental concerns should be integrated into the delivery of your teaching. And I would follow up on what Sharma said. I mean, in terms of our resilience, clearly COVID taught us that we're more resilient than we thought, because within a short duration, a lot of the schools and universities were able to deliver their programs online. And I think that it shows that if the same level of resilience is attached to what we do in terms of sustainability, we don't have to wait for a crisis for us to understand that this is when we have to apply certain specific knowledge. I think sustainable learning or education requires us that we should be forward-looking, and we should be anticipating some of these challenges that are likely to come up in the future. Currently, I don't think that the faculty and people delivering education are really prepped up and ready to deliver it. And a conscious effort must be made by the ecosystem to ensure that everyone who is participating in the delivery of education has a certain basic minimum knowledge of what sustainability is, so that in that delivery, they can help impart these things onto our. I think the next generation is very important. The extent to which we're able to impart the skills will ensure the sustainability that we want to achieve and acquire in our societies. And that's what I'll say about it.
All right. Thank you. And closing off the round on environmental sustainability quite well, Dr. Arthur. So I want to move into the realm of economic and financial sustainability. I mean, we heard from the chair of the ABN Group in the opening address just how fragile this the situation around money is still right now for the education sector. Prof. Marwala, we speak to a lot of economists on the channel at CNBC Africa, and they tell us on a frequent basis about the vulnerability of a lot of African sovereigns in this environment right now to debt distress. And what that does suggest is that, when allocations of funding is done at the public sector level, national treasury level, there is a relook at how much is given to education, and the feedback that we continually get is that not enough is being spent on education right now. But when you reflect on the current funding models, so just based on your experiences and your visits across universities, you're in Japan right now, but you've had insights into what is going on in the UK, in the US, and here in South Africa as well. What is your assessment of the current financial and economic sustainability, and how we should be thinking about just strengthening our position in the space, sir?
No, thank you very much. I think we need to differentiate education into two forms: higher education and basic education. Of course, if I just give a snapshot of higher education, the amount of economic distress is actually quite extensive. I have read, and I'm sure Professor Martin can add to this, that many universities in the UK and Australia, for example, are not sustainable if you could just remove international students. If international students and we should bear in mind that where these international students actually come from, they are building institutions, which basically means that model is going to become unsustainable. But the technological transformation that is happening does have a cost implications. I think in many ways, some of the subjects that used to be much more expensive to run, lab-based subjects, can be done at cost by deploying some of these technologies that are in many ways much cheaper than bricks and mortar. But I have to also be careful, because education is not just the classrooms and what we teach. It's the ecosystem that you build, where you get students in one community, and much of that learning actually happens between them. So online learning has serious limitations when it comes to interaction. But I think now, if you go to basic education, absolutely. I mean, we need to add new forms of subjects. Access to digital literacy is no longer an issue of a luxury; it's actually a human rights issue. And if we are to bridge the digital divide, we need to have access to the infrastructure. We need to have access to the know-how. The teachers must actually be able to know how to teach, and then we can be able to level the playing field.
All right. We actually have some questions that have started coming through. Jennifer Morrison, thanks for your question. Ma'am, we see it. We will put it to the panelists in just a short while, and that's also an invitation to the rest of you who are tuned in from wherever you are tuned in to participate if you do have a comment or if you do have a question that you'd like for me to put to the panel. Prof. Martin, Prof. Marwala essentially passed the baton to you in weighing in on the issue of funding, as was expressed and as has been expressed so far. Just relying on student fees is not a sustainable model, although what was shared earlier on was other avenues of funding sources, the likes of private equity and perhaps even to a degree development finance institutions, were also not as strong or as forthcoming at this stage. Just your thoughts then on strengthening the financing model and what you'd have to say to this.
In Australia, most universities would say that they're underfunded. the professor is right that if you were to remove international students from some of our universities, they would no longer be sustainable. Some universities have got very large numbers of international students, and taking them out of the mix or even reducing the number of international students in some of those universities would certainly mean a big hole in university finances. So we do have those issues in Australia, issues of sustainability. The other issue in Australia is that students over many years have increasingly had to fund their own degrees via a loan system. And what that's meant is that students graduate into the workplace with some significant debts that they have to repay, and it takes them a long time before they actually get ahead. So in Australia, part of the contribution is made by our Commonwealth government to a student place, and the student, depending on the discipline, pays a larger or smaller percentage of the degree tuition fees. But as I said, that's meant that students graduate with debt before they even start, which is unenviable situation for many students. I think in terms of the future, what we really need to consider is things like degree apprenticeships, which is a very popular model in the UK, where both industry and universities collaborate in the delivery of undergraduate qualifications in particular, but also some postgraduate qualifications. So what this means is potentially, some of the time on a campus or enrolled online, and the rest of the time actually getting experience in a workplace. And that is how the British describe a degree as a degree apprenticeship. So people get on-the-job experience. They're paid a basic salary to help them to fund their time as a student. The workplace gets an advantage of having an extra pair of hands and someone to help them think through issues, a fresh pair of eyes, if you like. And the university, working in partnership with industry, means that some of the costs actually end up in the workplace rather at the university. But in universities, the big barrier is universities often think that they are the only ones that can prepare students for a sustainable career, lifestyle, and so on, where I think it's probably headed towards a shared model.
Sure, because universities in and of themselves also have their own costs. They need to pay for their power source, they need to pay for water and all their other expenses. They need to pay their teachers, some of whom we are told feel underpaid right now having to make supplementary means to get by, which perhaps is compromising on the kind of time that they can deploy towards teaching. But Dr. Arthur, I'd like to get your thoughts here on the UK model. Probably it's not entirely unique to the African continent. Perhaps there are pockets of apprenticeships that are taking place right now. But if this is what the future of education is potentially looking like, a partnership between the private sector as well as academia in ensuring that students get over the line and get so in a way that is not or doesn't leave them with so much debt, particularly in their first few years of working. What do you reckon, or how scalable do you think the apprenticeship model is potentially on the African continent, and how viable of a solution do you reckon it could be for some of the funding challenges into the sector?
For example, I know in Canada, for example, they have these apprenticeship systems. So instead of maybe going to the traditional university, they go to the colleges. I know also they have what they call the co-op system, where students would be in school for a while, go work 1 year, and things like that. I would talk specifically about Ghana, for example. In the past years, in 2022, the government gave the amount of money spent was 13.8% of GDP on education. That was an increase of 1.01% from 2001. In 2021, it was 12.17%. We've got to be honest about ourselves and say that particularly, I'm speaking within the African context, the allocation of resources, the prioritization of resources, it's very, very important. And I think that if we look at the models that has happened in the Scandinavian countries, like Finland and what has happened in Singapore, where they've been able to assist students go through. I mean, I don't know if it still holds, but in Scandinavian countries, a lot of Africans have taken advantage of it and gone to school there, where they didn't have to pay for fees, but somehow we'll have to ask ourselves, how were these countries able to model their education along those lines, such that people can go to school without paying fees and there are a lot of lessons that we can take from there. I also think that the level of collaboration, and you rightly stated it, needs to be looked at in terms of what industry, because easily the corporates would be prepared to fund individuals. I mean, for example, this year, we are getting a lot of traction in our university from some corporate institutions who are prepared to fund and take 2, 3 students and pay their fees fully for them. These are things that as institutions we need to explore. This might be very minimal, but I think that we can escalate it and make it a bit more, increase the proportion of students who will be beneficiaries of such things. We've got to explore the possibility, both government, education ministry, business, academic institutions. This year, for example, we're trying to incorporate a system where, based on the facilities we have, people can come make use of some of our facilities, and it goes into the payment of fees of students and things like that. These are all opportunities that we need to explore. I don't think as institutions, we've really taken a hard and good look at options of funding for the universities. And we'll have to not get a bit out of our myopic look at some of these things and look at the bigger picture in terms of the people that would want to engage so that we can assist the students. And unfortunately, particularly within Africa, and for example, Ghana, there are a lot of people who, because of financial needs, are unable to access the education that they need. And I think that's a huge indictment on us. We need to look at the bigger picture and see the extent to which we can enhance the financing so that everybody can access it and make education accessible to everybody needs to get it. And that would be my take on it.
Sure, fantastic take, sir. And I do, it is a benefit for the students. I mean, ultimately being able to access an online qualification from an international university that you would have wanted to attend to physically but can't, to the point that Prof. Marwala was mentioning a little bit earlier, to say that, I mean, these kind of offerings are going to increase. So absolutely fantastic for students and even, adults who are engaging in lifelong learning, which I do know is also a part of sustainability. But again, just requiring institutions to think about their funding model, just given the fact that technology does pose a potential risk to current revenue lines. So Dr. Sharma, what would your thoughts be here in how institutions can take a closer look within and see what they can do and what else they can do to enhance their funding models? And what about the investment community, sir? The private equity investors, or even the DFIs, as we heard. Do you reckon that a greater responsibility needs to be levied on them as well to take a closer look at your sector?
Yeah, the first and the foremost thing that comes to my mind is institutions, if they look at their own self-management, that is, if they are 100% dependent on the tuition fee, their model has to be relooked. One is they have to think about their balance sheet and not only 100% relying on the tuition coming from the student and certain portion coming from the expertise of the university through the knowledge that it is generating. So if universities are able to generate consultancies, they are able to undertake training program, they work closely with the industry, with the government, probably they can have a certain portion of revenue coming from other sources, and that may help them to reduce the tuition. So that is one way of looking of how can you self-manage yourself, use your resources as a university, both the intellectual capital and the physical resources that you have. Second is, I agree with Professor Martin when he said about the internships. Is like you work closely with the companies, industries, because a student passes out is not day one productive in the company. They spend on his training. They give them training for 3 months, 6 months, and there's a cost involved. So if the industry is imbibed, they are invited to participate in the training and development while the curriculum is discharged. A part of the cost can be borne by the corporates. Many of my courses in my university, like MTech and VLSI and embedded system, is housed inside eInfochips, which is an aero company, the third largest player in the world. With Suzuki, we have a full assembly line inside the university. No university would have a car assembly line inside the university. We call the concept industry inside university and university inside industry. So it's like universities have to be innovative. If you have a problem where the student is facing an issue on the financial part, it has to be then social inclusion, stakeholder inclusion, which has to be brought in. And then the problem is easily addressable. And one of the models that I have implemented at my university in my College of Architecture and Design is our professors get the architecture consultancy and students participate and their fee is paid back. So they are not actually spending anything. They participate, they work along with the professor, do the consultancy, and they get paid back. So there are models which have evolved over the period of time, and we need to be innovative about it. And yes, if we are looking at the private equity investors and others, for some, it may be venture capitalist, but otherwise it may be vulture capitalist. Your objectives might not be remaining aligned to what exactly as an institution you are trying to do. Because if you borrow money, then you are doing what the lender is telling you to do. So that's where we have to be conscious. And there are innovations which have been done, which are possible to support the financial need of the students. This is my take on this. Thank you.
Fantastic. And you actually answered one of the questions that we did have come through from Mr. Rakesh Misri. Rakesh, you'll just let us know if it was fully answered, because I think that the panelists have all weighed in their individual aspects on the issue of funding. If it is not sufficient, do let us know and we'll put it to them. Another question that has come through, Prof. Marwanda, is from Wandile Kasibe, and it's speaking to the social prism of sustainability, which is where I want us to go right now. And in the social prism, or in the social complex, so just looking at the topic of inclusion and equity, but also looking at it through the structure of the curriculum and the culture and the actual knowledge that is taught. So the question, Prof. Marwala, goes, what is the response of the panel, of yourself specifically, when it does come to sustainability in the context of the call of decolonization in the higher education and other institutions of knowledge production?
Well, I think maybe just to say that, just to answer in general how we can be able to embed sustainability into education. I think the first thing that we need to do and be clear about are the values that we need to inculcate in our education system. And of course, those values will involve inclusion, they will involve fairness, and we do know that the environmental degradation was not done uniformly across the world. The African continent has contributed quite less than any other person to any other continent to the carbon footprint. The second thing, which is really the value of education, how do we change the behavior of people? How does education produce graduates that have the required behavior when it comes to issues of sustainability? Whether it is behavior towards consumption, whether it is behavior towards production. And then the third element is really about incentives. how do we incentivize institutions to teach the right things? It's not just about policies, it's also about incentives, And the fourth thing is, how do we create policy frameworks that we need? And then the last thing is really about the curriculum. How do we, what is its structure? How should it look like? Who should teach? I like the idea that has already been said. I think Professor Martin has talked about it. I think problem-based learning, I think, has to become our culture. I think the idea that we bring all stakeholders to the table, whether they are industries, whether they are the political formations, whether they are the societies in general, has to become part of our culture. The issues of ensuring that we minimalism, I call it the principle of minimalism. Let us be efficient in doing what we do. One of the biggest problems that we face, and we have not talked about this, is the dropout rate in our educational system. How many people come to university and end up without the knowledge that they came here to do? And of course, what is even more worrying is people who don't drop out, but they were not educated. They have certificates, but they were not educated. I think those are very important issues.
For sure, and I am hoping that those issues will be addressed throughout the day today. We've got quite a number of panels that will be tackling a whole host of aspects, and I'm sure that those will come through. I mean, when we do talk about inclusion and equity, of course, we haven't dug deep into what we mean by inclusion regarding people with different abilities within the education system. We also haven't dug deeper into what we mean regarding inclusion on gender, and I won't make reference to this panel. But I do know that we'll have a wider gender inclusion later on. But Prof. Martin, maybe your thoughts here on the social aspect of equality and inclusion, and how it can be better enhanced to strengthen the sustainability of the education ecosystem.
Yeah, I think what we should do is we should go straight to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And for viewers who don't know about them, there are 17 goals. They have 169 targets that all 191 UN member states have agreed to achieve by 2030. That's 6 years ago. And embedded within those is within those 17 is gender equality. Yet it seems like we have a lot more to do just in the area of gender equality before 2030. So we better start now if we're going to achieve any of the targets that are in those SDGs, as they're called. And I think the other thing that I would add in was that if you look at those SDGs, they actually give us a little bit of meat on what we really mean by sustainability, because they cover things like no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, as I've already said, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities. There's 17 of them, which means we've got our work cut out for us. And if we don't start to map our basic qualifications or certifications against these 17, if you like, SDGs, as they're called, then we will never achieve the targets that are set, and that includes gender equality. We need to embed all these things or map these SDGs against our degree programs so that we can actually see what we're actually covering and getting people to do, what we're focusing on and what we're not focusing on, probably more importantly. So I think gender equality sits in one of many of these things that we've got a long way to go with. And unless we do a mapping or an audit of what we're currently doing, we won't get anywhere fast.
I believe it's never too late to start. There's a saying, I believe, that goes that the best time to start was yesterday and the next best time to start is today. But I agree with you fully in terms of integrating the SDG principles into the curricula, and it's something that I'm going to unpack a little bit later on in my panel with panel 4 at around 1:30, when we talk about how to actually build sustainable ecosystems in more detail, sustainable education ecosystems. But Dr. Arthur, perhaps I'd like to end off with you, and like to end off with a question that comes from Jennifer Morrison, and essentially it's a question that takes us back to the ABCs when it does come to building a resilient education sector. Jennifer says that she believes that you cannot start with higher education. We need to start with early childhood education. The first 5 years of the child's life is where the most important development happens, and this is where sustainable learning and education needs to start. I saw all of you nodding, which does suggest that this is not something new, and clearly this is something that you agree with. But how can this be something that's better integrated in the education value chain, in your view, Dr. Arthur?
There's this adage in our local parlance that says that you cannot teach an old guy, a dog, new tricks, and they'll be set in their ways, and it becomes very difficult to change them. I think that if we can't catch these children very young, and there's been a debate in our country regarding the government's funding of, we have what we call the free SHS, that children who go to school in senior high schools do not have to pay fees. I mean, I'm all for it. We've had challenges with it. But I think it rides on the notion that we are catching the children at a very young age. And that's very, very important. And we all remember the formative years, or formative part of our years, the things that we learn. And I think that that's the way we need to go. Some basic practical skills, experiential, and we've talked about problem-based learning. We can talk about experiential learning. The children don't have to sit in class and be taught the rote approach to teaching. Let's get them into practical things, hands-on things. And I think that's the bane of African education. We've concentrated too much on the rote learning. These little kids out there to experience things for themselves, some experiential learning, participating in things. And I think that's the way to go. So a blend of the practical things that we do, and then the classroom approach to teaching, I think is what we need for our basic education. And I think that with that approach, those children will grow up from the basic level through to the university level, and they would have learned a bit more better than waiting for them to get to universities for them to acquire the knowledge that they will need in the job environment. And those will be my closing remarks for that.
And I think a perfect point in which to conclude the discussion, a point on collaboration and partnerships, and not only collaboration. I mean, when you look at what needs to happen with stakeholders in the education sector, as well as the private sector and the public sector at large, but also education within the education value, collaboration within the education value as it is, to the point that Jennifer was making. I mean, early childhood development at the primary level, also the high school level, as well as tertiary and employment. To all of you, though, thank you so much for giving us those insights into how we can certainly strengthen the sustainability and the resilience of the education sector. I mean, my key takeaway is just being the fact that we're not quite there yet, but I think what you have given us is quite a number of ideas and nuggets on how perhaps to implement to get us there. Maybe 2030 is a mark that we could actually meet if we do implement some of the ideas that have been expressed in this panel, and I'm sure further ideas that we'll hear on throughout the day. But to all of you, thank you so much for your time, Prof. Gary Martin, of course, Prof. Chilidzi Marwala, Dr. Mahendra Sharma, as well as Dr. Emmanuel Arthur, just giving us a global view on this topic.